So, welcome to Storytime. Thank you for joining us today. It is Valentine's Day, which is really exciting. So, to celebrate that, I'm going to share with you the story of someone who I really love, and that is Emmeline Pankhurst. So, this kind of is a little bit like our Halloween story last year, where we kind of looked at some information and some stories that weren't necessarily totally fiction. So this is pretty fun. We actually get to look at a real person. This particular series, Little People Big Dreams, I'll bring that a bit closer so you can see that at the top, is actually a series of loads of different people, which started off as very important women in history, which is brilliant because it gives you such a great insight. And the way that they're written is that you can learn so much about that person and their life and their achievements, but in real kind of bite size, actually find out the real essential facts. So that's really fun to do, because sometimes these figures can be seem quite intimidating, and they shouldn't be. And especially important women in history should be celebrated. So that is why me and Pooh Bear are going to share the story of Emmeline today. So this particular book, you have to get a bit closer though. Yeah, that's right. So Lisbeth Kaiser is the author, this particular one, and our illustrator today is Anna Sanfilippo. Apologies, Anna. So what's quite fun about this book is you might have noticed straight away there are particular colours distinct on the back colour, and then if we get a bit closer, the colour on Emmeline's dress as well, and of course obviously on her rosette, which very famously says "Votes for Women." So that's a big clue. If you didn't know who Emmeline was, that's who we're looking at. And the inside colour, there are some very distinctive colour spots as well. Another big clue to who she is. So let's go through Emmeline's story in Little People Big Dreams, Emmeline Pankhurst. Emmeline was born into a big family in a nice house in Manchester, England. At the time she grew up, life was hard for many people. Her parents did whatever they could to help, and they often brought the young Emmeline along. So there's some great pictures there outside Emmeline's house. Red brick houses, very distinctive. And then obviously here, the sign, for anyone who didn't catch it, over here in the bazaar is Support Emancipation USA. Emmeline learnt to read when she was 3, and it became her favourite thing to do. She read the newspaper and book after book, drawn to stories of heroes who fought for others. She dreamt about who she might become. So what's quite nice here is obviously you've got Emmeline reading and dreaming away, and then you've got all her siblings around her as well. Some of the books have names on them, like The Odyssey, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and she's actually reading the book of the French Revolution. And the newspaper down the bottom has on it 1861. So it's quite fun. And what's quite nice about this story is that the rest of the children are all playing very distinctive stereotype kind of games and toys and things like that, whereas Emmeline is definitely a part. It's a lovely picture. But Emmeline didn't have many choices because she was a girl. One night she heard her father say that it was too bad she wasn't a boy. She wouldn't go to university, get a job, or even vote like her brothers. Emmeline didn't understand why. I think she's looking a little bit annoyed about that in the bed there, while she's laying down listening to the conversation. I mean, I would agree, and I think a lot of people would agree as well, especially nowadays. Well, why can't Emmeline go to university? Why can't she do that? So I think that's a very important part of her story. She wasn't expected to do things like her brothers were being. She began to read about women's rights and begged her mother to bring her to a meeting so she could learn more. There, Emmeline heard that women in England, like in many other countries, were treated unfairly. They needed the right to vote in order to change things. Emmeline knew what she had to do. There we go. It's a really cool picture. I quite like how many different ages there seems to be in this particular depiction of the meeting, which is great because I think it's a great representation of, you know, it doesn't affect just one person, it affects lots of people. And the name of the lecturer, it's actually on the chalkboard, Lydia Burker Lecture. So that must be referencing to this lady here. As soon as Emmeline finished school, she began working for women's rights. One of the leaders of the cause was a lawyer named Richard, who also believed that women should be equal to men. The two fell in love, working side by side to help women win the right to vote. So we've got grown-up Emmeline now here at the front, and obviously there's Richard, and they're inviting people, they're trying to encourage people to come to the meeting. This meeting sign actually says, "Today, Women's Franchise League meeting." So we'll move on. Emmeline and Richard married and had a family. For many years, they tried to get voting rights for women, but nothing changed. Sadly, Richard became sick and died, leaving Emmeline with 4 children, little money, and no rights as a woman. So we start off with quite a nice picture, despite the hardship of what they're actually reading is newspapers, and they say women's vote left off the ballot. That would be referencing to a vote in Parliament that they're not even going to consider. And there's the one that Richard is reading actually says Women's Franchise League falls apart. So it's obviously not going very well at this point. Some other newspapers they've got on there, women ignored and promises to women broken. And then we see a nice picture of their 3 daughters standing at the back and their son at the front. And then obviously on the other page, which is quite nice, we've got Emmeline in a very sombre kind of picture here. Obviously Richard's now passed away and their house is for sale because she can't afford to keep it. Emmeline had to work very hard to support her family, but she didn't stop supporting women's rights. Soon, it was her daughters who begged Emmeline to take them to meetings. They asked why women had been following unfair rules for so long. This gave Emmeline an idea. So now the girls are all grown up as well, and they can see what's been happening, so they want to get involved. So there's a great sign there, votes for women, in the middle of the table, which is obviously the very distinctive slogan that gets seen a lot. Emmeline and her daughters became the leaders of a new group of women, a group that would stop following the rules and would start fighting for their rights. People called them suffragettes. They started by speaking out on street corners and at fairs. They stood up to protest at big meetings. Some people laughed at them, but others began to listen. So we've got some great pictures here of Emmeline and her daughters at the one of her meetings. Deeds, not words, which is very, very powerful message there, especially in this context. And then an example of talking to people out on the street and people starting to listen. The government tried to stop them, so they fought harder. They marched in the streets, they broke windows, set fires, and chained themselves to railings. Even though some were hurt and others arrested, more and more women joined Emmeline's group. They were braver than anyone had ever imagined. So what's quite impressive about this one is that they're outside Buckingham Palace, having a bit of a protest, and why not? That sounds great. That they're stand up and doing these things, and they're going right to the seat of power, and to make sure that they're heard. And then obviously here we go, we've got the police coming to take them away. In between spending many days in prison, Emmeline travelled to the US, that's the United States, and spoke out at big theatres. People gathered by the thousands to hear her. She told them she would keep fighting until every woman was free to do the same things as men. Now, they don't tell you which theatre this is, but it kind of looks, perhaps, especially the colours, maybe based a little bit on Carnegie Hall in New York, but I'm not, obviously I can't confirm that. And Emmeline's there on the stage and she's saying, women are human beings. So if I bring that a bit closer. Then a great war broke out and lots of men went off to fight. Emmeline encouraged suffragettes to take over jobs that only men had done before, and they were stronger than anyone had believed. So here are some awesome pictures of all women out to work. So we've got at the farm on the right here, or over here, and on the other page we've got like more traditional roles like nursing, but taking more of a leadership role and taking more control, and the police. And what's quite nice about that picture with the police is that previously, if we go back to the page where they were protesting, it was quite nice that in this page it was just the men who were the police. But now it shows that the women were just as good. After the war, Emmeline's dream came true. Women would finally get the right to vote. By fighting for others, Emmeline had done what no one thought a little girl could do. She had become a hero, So what's quite nice about this picture is, even though it's the outcome and all the women that they're voting, it's actually part of little Emmeline's dream. Which is just very, very powerful. So that was the history of Emmeline Pankhurst, the leader of the suffragettes movement in England and inspiring women's movements across the world. But what we've actually got now, which is just a brilliant thing to have in one of these books, and just such an important part, especially when trying to, get to know these people a lot more and find out what they actually did, is some amazing pictures of Emmeline herself. So I'll let you have a look. So these pictures range from when she was born in, was it 1858, and the first picture's from 1875. So that's not too bad. Maybe like, late teens, early 20s. My maths is terrible. I'm terribly sorry. And then the last picture was taken in the year that she passed away, 1928. So let's read up a little bit here on Emmeline's life as well. Emmeline Pankhurst was one of the world's most influential activists who helped British women win the right to vote. Born in Manchester, England, Emmeline was inspired at a young age by her parents' activism and went to her first meeting about women's rights or suffrage with her mother at age 14. She soon began working for suffrage, eventually marrying one of its leaders, Richard Pankhurst. When Richard died unexpectedly, Emmeline raised their 4 children and worked whilst continuing to fight for suffrage. Emmeline and her daughters started a new women's activist group that encouraged women to demand their rights with deeds, not words, protesting in ways only men had done before. They were often hurt and arrested, but they kept fighting, gaining support worldwide and changing the way people thought about women. During World War I, Emmeline's suffragette army stopped protesting and took jobs that men left behind, which helped the country and showed how capable women were. The British government gave all women the right to vote shortly after Emmeline died, and many other countries followed suit. Emmeline's heroism and leadership changed the minds of an entire nation and changed the lives of women forever. So some important points about that is, you may have noticed that at the end of the story, it talks about after the war, Emmeline's dream came true, and the first women were allowed, gained the right to vote in 1918, which was recently, not so long ago, celebrated. The centenary was celebrated, but in the follow-up, it actually says it wasn't until after Emmeline had passed away that everyone received the right to vote. And that's true, because that's very important to note that though the government gave in and allowed women to vote in 1918, it should be noticed that they didn't let all women vote. You had to be married, and you had to, I believe, own property as well, or if you weren't married, you had to own property. So there was a lot of restrictions, and it should be good to note, which I think is very important, especially for this story in this book, is that on one page, if we go back a little bit, when Emmeline was doing her world tours, back here, it's noted that Emmeline told them she would keep fighting until every woman was free to do the same things as men. Well, today it's 2021, and that's still not true. So, because it's not true, and Emmeline's not here, I think it just means that maybe we need to make sure that we're making our voices heard, and that everybody, not just the women, are actually voting for women's rights all around the world. Because nobody's free if not all of us are. I'd just like to end this particular book series because I just think it's such an amazing series. I have 2 of them, but there are loads, and even though it actually started with, I'm putting this up, some incredible women in history, they are actually branching out, and there are some stories now in more recent books of incredible men, because everyone can contribute, but we just got to make sure that all the stories are heard equally. So the other stories that you can hear, some of them, are Frida Kahlo, and the one that I really want, Amelia Earhart, Rosa Parks, Audrey Hepburn. There's loads. Maya Angelou. There's just so many amazing stories out there, and it's really important that they're all shared and they're all celebrated. So I hope you enjoyed this today of our little story into history of, if I bring that a bit closer, I don't think there's going to be, oh there we go. Nice picture of her, of Emmeline Pankhurst. And hopefully you learnt something that you didn't know about Emmeline. And even more better, I hope you're inspired to go and do something to help women just like she did. I'm sure you all know someone, at least one woman who's very special in your life. And especially today, Valentine's Day, why not go tell them that you love them, and then go and tell them that you're going to do stuff to make sure that all women can be free. Because I think there's one last passing thought, because it's really important to always think about what other people are going through, because on the page here, where Emmeline was very young and she overheard her parents talking about how she couldn't do things because she was a girl. Even I've been told I can't do certain things because I'm a girl. And it is very discouraging. So, it's important to know you can do anything. You just got to find out how, and then follow it, and encourage other people to do the same. So, thank you for joining us today. This was Emmeline Pankhurst. This particular story was written by Lisbeth Kaiser, and it's going to do it right this time, illustrated by Anna Sanfilippo. I hope you enjoyed our story time. Thank you for joining. So from me and Pooh, we'd like to say bye. Bye, and we'll see you next time. Say bye, Pooh. Bye. Oh, and wear your mask, just like Pooh Bear. Bye.